Ambassador Thalen stared at his computer screen for the third time that evening. The blue light hurt his eyes, but he could not look away. The file he had found was marked with the highest security level possible. Few beings in the entire galaxy had permission to read these words. The human quarantine case had seemed simple when he first picked it up from his desk. Just another primitive species that needed to be kept away from civilized worlds. Thalen had handled dozens of similar cases during his time with the Historical Review Committee. Usually the reasons were obvious. Some species were too violent. Others were too disease-ridden. A few were simply too stupid to understand basic technology without hurting themselves. But humans were different. Their mathematics were actually quite good. Their art was beautiful in strange ways. Their music made even other species feel emotions they did not understand. They had already invented faster-than-light communication and were working on space travel. By all normal standards, they should have been contacted and invited to join the galactic community decades ago. So why were they still locked away on their little planet like dangerous animals in a cage? Thalen clicked through file after file looking for the real answer. The public records all said the same thing. Humans were too aggressive. They fought too many wars. They could not be trusted around peaceful species. Standard stuff that he had read 1,000 times before. But tonight, something had felt wrong about those explanations. Maybe it was the way his supervisor had looked nervous when Thalen asked about the case. Maybe it was the fact that 3 different department heads had tried to reassign him to other work this week. Maybe it was just his natural curiosity getting the better of him. Whatever the reason, Thalen had decided to dig deeper. It took him 4 hours to find the hidden files. They were buried under layers of security codes and false directories. Someone had worked very hard to make sure these documents stayed hidden. That made Thalen even more determined to read them. The first classified report was dated just after the humans finished their last major war in 2089. Thalen expected to read about terrible weapons or massive death counts. Instead, he found something that made his stomach turn cold. The report was written by Observer Kalen, a member of the Temporal Research Division. Kalen had been sent to watch human behavior during their final conflict. His job was to take notes about how humans handled warfare so the Council could decide if they were ready for contact with other species. But Kalen's report was unlike anything Thalen had ever read. Day 15 of observation, the report said. I have witnessed something that should not be possible. The humans are not just surviving this war. They are enjoying it. Not the winning. Not the peace that might come after. They are actually having fun during the fighting itself. Thalen read that line 3 times before it made sense. Having fun during war? That could not be right. Every species in the galaxy treated war the same way. It was something terrible that sometimes had to be done. Like surgery or taking bitter medicine. Necessary but horrible. The report continued with example after example. Human soldiers writing poetry about battles. Engineers competing with each other to build more creative weapons. Commanders who treated strategy like it was some kind of exciting game. Even wounded humans who thanked their enemies for providing such interesting challenges. Subject named William Davies was shot through the chest today, Kalen wrote. As medical teams worked to save his life, he kept laughing and telling his friends about the clever way his enemy had outmaneuvered him. He seemed genuinely impressed by the tactics used to hurt him. He died with a smile on his face. Thalen felt sick. What kind of creature smiled while dying in battle? He opened the next file. This one was written by the Council's head psychologist after reviewing all the observation reports. We have encountered something unprecedented, the psychologist wrote. Every other species we have studied shows the same response to warfare. Fear, trauma, sadness, and a desperate desire for the fighting to end. Humans show none of these normal responses. Instead, they demonstrate what can only be called happiness. They have somehow learned to enjoy the most stressful and dangerous situations possible. The report went on to describe interview after interview with human veterans. Not one of them expressed regret about their war. Instead, they talked about it the way other species might talk about their favorite hobbies. They used words like exhilarating and meaningful and the best time of my life. The humans have weaponized joy itself, the psychologist concluded. They have turned suffering into entertainment and conflict into art. If this trait spreads to other species, it could destroy the careful peace we have built across the galaxy. They must be contained at all costs. Thalen sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Finally, he understood. The Council was not afraid of human violence. They were afraid of human happiness. Every other species in the galaxy had learned the same basic lesson about survival. Life was hard, dangerous, and full of pain. The smart thing to do was to avoid risks, seek comfort, and try to minimize suffering. This was normal. This was sane. This was how civilized beings were supposed to think. But humans had somehow evolved in the opposite direction. They did not just tolerate hardship. They celebrated it. They turned every challenge into a game and every obstacle into entertainment. They had learned to be happy under conditions that would break the spirit of any other species. And that made them the most dangerous beings the galaxy had ever encountered. Not because they would fight wars, but because they might teach others to enjoy fighting them. Observer Kalen adjusted his recording equipment and checked the time. October 15, 2089. This would be the last day of human warfare, though the creatures fighting below had no idea they were being watched from space. The Battle of Manchester was supposed to be simple. The Resource Alliance had surrounded the Northern Coalition forces with 3 times as many soldiers. Every computer model said the coalition would surrender within hours or be completely destroyed by evening. Kalen had seen this pattern dozens of times on other worlds. The losing side would either give up or fight desperately until they were all dead. But as dawn broke over the ruined city, something strange happened. Coalition Commander James Mitchell stood on top of a broken building and spoke to his soldiers through a crackling radio. Kalen expected to hear fear or anger or desperate motivation. Instead, Mitchell was smiling as he talked. "Right then, everyone," Mitchell said cheerfully. "We are outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded. Our ammunition is running low and our escape routes are cut off." He paused and his smile grew wider. "This is going to be absolutely brilliant." The human soldiers around him began to laugh. Not the bitter laughter of people who had given up hope, but genuine excitement. They were looking forward to this impossible fight. Kalen quickly adjusted his translation software. Surely he was misunderstanding something. "Today we show these Resource Alliance fellows what real creativity looks like," Mitchell continued. "Engineering teams, I want you to turn this city into our playground. Medical teams, keep everyone fighting fit so they do not miss the fun. Everyone else, let us give our enemies the most interesting day of their lives." The humans scattered to their positions, chattering excitedly about tactics and strategies. Engineer Margaret Foster immediately began pulling apart damaged vehicles and broken machinery. Within an hour, she had built strange musical instruments from scrap metal. The soldiers started using these instruments to coordinate their movements, turning the battlefield into a deadly orchestra. Kalen watched in horror as human fighters began dancing between explosions. They moved to rhythm, using music to time their attacks and coordinate their defense. Enemy artillery became percussion in their twisted symphony. Lieutenant Thomas Brooks found himself surrounded by Alliance soldiers in a bombed-out school building. Instead of panicking, he radioed back to headquarters with obvious delight in his voice. "This is Brooks. I have got enemy forces coming at me from 3 directions. They have cut off my exit and are closing in fast." He paused and Kalen could hear gunfire in the background. "This is like solving the most brilliant puzzle ever created. I think I can use the old heating system to create a distraction while I escape through the basement. Wish me luck." Brooks sounded like a child who had just found the most exciting game in the world. Across the battlefield, sniper Alice Carter had turned enemy elimination into a personal competition. She kept score in a small notebook, rating each shot not just for accuracy but for style and creativity. When she made a particularly difficult shot, she would actually compliment her target over the radio, praising their skill at finding good cover. "Beautiful positioning, Alliance Sniper Team 3, she called out after a 20-minute duel. "You almost had me with that mirror trick. 10 points for innovation." Then she took them out with a ricochet shot that bounced off 3 different surfaces. The most disturbing moment came when demolitions expert Robert Hayes began signing his explosions. Each bomb he set off created patterns of destruction that served tactical purposes while also functioning as art. He carved his initials into enemy positions using precisely placed charges, turning warfare into sculpture. "Every explosion tells a story," Hayes explained to his radio operator while preparing another artistic demolition. "This one is going to spell out, 'Welcome to Manchester,' in the enemy supply depot. They will appreciate the craftsmanship even if they do not survive to see it finished." When Private William Davies was shot during an afternoon assault, his reaction made Kalen question everything he thought he knew about intelligent life. As medics worked to stop the bleeding from his chest wound, Davies kept talking excitedly about the battle. "Did you see that shot the Alliance sniper made?" Davies asked, his voice getting weaker but his excitement never fading. "Absolute poetry that was. 300 meters in crosswind and he led my movement perfectly. I am almost honored to be taken down by shooting that good." He died still praising his enemy's skill, with what could only be described as happiness on his face. By sunset, the impossible had happened. The outnumbered coalition forces had not just survived but actually won. They had turned Manchester into a death maze so creative and unpredictable that the Alliance forces had retreated in confusion. But their victory celebration was what truly frightened Kalen. They did not celebrate winning the war. They celebrated the war itself. They thanked their enemies for providing such an interesting challenge. They composed songs about the day's battles and turned their tactical victories into stories that made everyone laugh. Commander Mitchell raised a toast with dirty water from a broken pipe. "To the Resource Alliance," he said solemnly, "for giving us the finest day of combat any of us will ever experience. They fought with honor, skill, and remarkable creativity. We could not have asked for worthier opponents." The soldiers cheered and drank their toast to the enemies who had tried to kill them just hours earlier. Kalen filed his report that night with shaking hands. These humans had not just survived warfare. They had enjoyed every moment of it. They treated death and destruction like entertainment, turned strategy into art, and found genuine joy in the most horrible circumstances imaginable. The galaxy had never seen anything like them. And Kalen prayed it never would again. The emergency meeting room deep inside the council station had never been so quiet. 7 of the galaxy's most powerful leaders sat around a metal table, staring at the reports spread before them. The documents told an impossible story about a species that should not exist. Council Prime Zareth picked up the first observation report and read it again, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. Human soldiers were still described as laughing during battles and thanking enemies for providing good fights. "This cannot be accurate," said Admiral Vex, tapping his claws nervously on the table. "Our translation systems must be malfunctioning. No intelligent species enjoys warfare." Medical Chief Nora shook her head slowly. "I checked the translations myself. 3 times. The humans are saying exactly what we think they are saying." Counselor Lyra leaned forward. "Perhaps they are simply trying to appear brave? Many species use humor to hide their fear during dangerous situations." "No," said Philosopher General Thek in his deep, rumbling voice. "I have studied the brain scans our medical teams took. These humans show genuine pleasure responses during combat situations. Their brains release happiness chemicals when they are being shot at." The room fell silent again. Everyone knew what this meant, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Finally, Admiral Vex spoke up. "On my homeworld we have a saying. When you find a creature that enjoys what should kill it, you have found something that cannot be controlled." Council Prime Zareth set down the report and looked around the table. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. These humans fought a global war that lasted 3 years. Millions of them died. Their cities were destroyed. Their planet was nearly uninhabitable by the end." "Correct," said Medical Chief Nora. "And instead of being traumatized by this experience, they describe it as the most meaningful time in their history?" "That is what the interviews indicate, yes. They write poetry about battles. They compose music about strategy. They create art celebrating the intelligence of their enemies." Counselor Lyra nodded reluctantly. Human Colonel Rebecca Stone told our interviewer that watching her best friend die was heartbreaking, but she immediately praised the tactical brilliance of the enemy commander who killed her friend. She called it beautiful. Philosopher General Thek stood up and began pacing around the small room. "This violates every principle of natural selection. Species survive by avoiding danger, not by seeking it out. Creatures that enjoy life-threatening situations should have died out millions of years ago. Unless," said Admiral Vex quietly, "they became so good at handling danger that it stopped being dangerous to them." The implications of this statement hit everyone at the same time. If humans had evolved to thrive in deadly situations, what would happen when they encountered problems that were merely difficult? Medical Chief Nora pulled up a holographic display showing human civilian populations during their war years. "Look at this data. While their soldiers were fighting, their civilians were creating art, music, and literature at unprecedented rates. They invented new technologies, wrote scientific papers, and established universities. Their entire civilization flourished during their most destructive period." "They used warfare as motivation," whispered Counselor Lyra. "They turned their survival instincts into creative energy." Council Prime Zareth stood up abruptly. "What happens if we integrate them into galactic society? What happens when other species learn this behavior?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone in the room could imagine the consequences. Admiral Vex spoke first. "The Altarians would try to copy human tactics. They are always looking for ways to improve their military efficiency. The Centaurians would want to understand how humans stay calm under pressure, added Medical Chief Nora. They struggle with anxiety disorders. Philosopher General Thek stopped pacing. Young beings from peaceful species would start seeking out dangerous situations for entertainment. They would want to experience this human emotion they keep hearing about. Adventure, said Counselor Lyra. That is what humans call it. The pleasure of facing uncertainty and danger. Council Prime Zareth walked to the large window overlooking the station's main hub. Thousands of peaceful aliens from hundreds of different worlds moved through the corridors below. They lived quiet, safe lives focused on comfort and security. It had taken centuries to build this stable civilization. Imagine, he said without turning around, if even 10% of our young people developed human attitudes toward risk and challenge. They would start taking unnecessary chances, Admiral Vex said grimly. They would seek out conflict instead of avoiding it. They would turn every disagreement into entertainment, added Medical Chief Nora. Every problem would become a game to solve rather than something to endure. Worse, said Philosopher General Thek. They might start wars just because they enjoyed the challenge of fighting them. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated this nightmare scenario. A galaxy where species fought not out of necessity or anger, but because they found warfare fun. Counselor Lyra voiced what everyone was thinking. The humans would not even need to teach this behavior deliberately. Their attitude toward life is so fundamentally different from ours that simple contact would be enough to influence other species. Like a disease, Admiral Vex muttered. A disease of dangerous happiness. Council Prime Zareth finally turned around to face the others. Then we have no choice. The quarantine must be permanent. But they have done nothing wrong, protested Counselor Lyra. They are not actually violent toward other species. They have never even met other species. They do not need to be violent, replied Philosopher General Thek. Their very existence is a threat to galactic stability. They represent an evolutionary path that could destroy everything we have built. The vote was unanimous. 7 hands raised in favor of permanent isolation for the entire human species. As the meeting ended, Council Prime Zareth made one final entry in the official record. Species 7834H quarantine confirmed indefinite. Reason, dangerous happiness. May the void forgive us. Dr. Emily Watson crawled through the tunnel beneath Old London for the 5th time this week. Her hands were dirty and her back ached, but the excitement in her chest made every painful step worthwhile. 300 years of isolation had not dampened human curiosity. If anything, it had made them more determined to reach the stars. The quantum communication device hidden in the underground laboratory looked like a pile of scrap metal to most people. Emily knew better. She had spent 6 years building it from salvaged parts and theoretical physics textbooks. Tonight, for the first time, someone from beyond Earth was trying to talk to her. The message appeared on her cracked computer screen in simple mathematical symbols. Prime numbers, geometric patterns, and basic equations that any intelligent species would understand. Then, slowly, words began to form. This is Ambassador Thalen of the Galactic Council. I know the truth about your quarantine. We need to talk. Emily stared at the screen for several minutes before responding. Her hands shook as she typed back. This is Dr. Emily Watson, Earth. We have been waiting for contact for a very long time. Over the following weeks, Emily learned about the galaxy that existed beyond her prison planet. Thalen told her about hundreds of peaceful species living together in harmony. He described worlds of incredible beauty and technologies that could solve every problem humanity faced. But he also explained why Earth remained isolated. The Council fears that humans will teach other species to enjoy dangerous situations, Thalen transmitted one evening. They believe your attitude toward challenges and conflict could spread like a disease across the galaxy. Emily laughed out loud in her empty laboratory. We don't want to teach anyone to enjoy conflict. We want to teach them to enjoy life, even when it's difficult. What is the difference? Thalen asked. Emily thought for a moment before answering. The difference is that we don't seek out problems. We just refuse to let problems make us miserable. When bad things happen, we find ways to make them interesting instead of just painful. This conversation gave Emily an idea that would change everything. What if I could show you what human culture really looks like? She asked. Not warfare or violence, but the things we do for fun when we're at peace? Thalen agreed to the experiment. Over the next several months, Emily began transmitting carefully selected human cultural information to worlds across the galaxy. She started with games, sports, and what humans called extreme hobbies. Rock climbing, ocean surfing, puzzle solving, and competitive challenges that pushed physical and mental limits without causing real harm. The response was immediate and electric. On the water world of Aquarius, young Aquarians discovered something called wave riding. Within weeks, they were building primitive surfboards and seeking out the largest, most dangerous waves they could find. Their parents watched in horror as their children deliberately swam toward tsunamis, laughing and shouting with excitement. "It feels incredible," reported young Aquarian reef singer Kala to her local news station. "The bigger the wave, the more alive I feel when I ride it. I never knew that danger could be so much fun." Similar changes began happening across dozens of worlds. On the mountain planet of Petra, youth abandoned traditional meditation practices to attempt something they called summit seeking. They climbed impossible rock faces for no practical purpose except the joy of reaching the top. On the desert world of Shar, young beings started racing vehicles across dangerous terrain at high speeds, competing to see who could navigate the most treacherous courses without getting hurt. Most disturbing to the Council were the intellectual changes. Young aliens began forming problem-solving clubs, where they deliberately created difficult puzzles and challenges for themselves. They stopped trying to make their lives easier and started trying to make them more interesting. The Council noticed these changes within a month. Ambassador Thalen, came an urgent transmission from Council Prime Zareth. "We are receiving concerning reports from multiple member worlds. Young beings are engaging in dangerous recreational activities and expressing enjoyment at unnecessary difficulties. But the changes could not be stopped." Emily's transmissions had planted seeds of human thinking across the galaxy, and those seeds were growing rapidly. A teenage Centaurian named Blue Wing started a club called Adventure Seekers on his homeworld. Members competed to find the most creative solutions to artificial problems they created for themselves. When adults tried to shut down the club, Blue Wing responded with words that chilled Council observers. "Why would we want easy lives when difficult ones are so much more exciting?" On the scholarly world of Vega Prime, students began requesting courses in challenge studies and applied difficulty. They wanted to learn how to find joy in situations their species had always considered unpleasant. Most worrying was a group of young beings from 6 different species who sent a joint message to the Council. "We have heard about the quarantined humans. We want to meet them. We want to learn how they made war itself into something beautiful instead of just horrible." Emily received updates about these changes through her secret communications with Thalen. Each report made her smile wider. "Your people are causing a revolution," Thalen transmitted with what Emily interpreted as a mixture of fear and admiration. "Young beings across the galaxy are discovering that existence doesn't have to be merely survived. They're learning that it can be celebrated." "Good," Emily replied. "Maybe now the Council will understand that humans aren't dangerous because we love conflict. We're different because we love life enough to enjoy all of it, even the hard parts." The secret was out. Human attitudes were spreading across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by young beings who had discovered something their species had never known, that facing challenges could be the source of the deepest happiness possible. The quarantine was failing, not through violence or technology, but through the most human trait of all, the irrepressible urge to find joy in any situation. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never held so many beings at one time. Representatives from 600 different worlds filled every seat, while millions more watched through holographic broadcasts. After 300 years of secrecy, the truth about humanity's quarantine would finally be revealed. Captain Helen Andrews stood at the center podium, looking remarkably calm for someone whose entire species' future depended on the next few hours. She wore a simple blue uniform and carried no weapons or technology. Her only preparation had been reading the classified files that Ambassador Thalen had secretly provided to Earth. Council Prime Zareth called for silence. "This hearing will determine whether Species 7834H, known as humans, will remain under permanent quarantine or be granted membership in the galactic community. Captain Andrews, you may speak for your people." Helen stepped forward and looked around the massive chamber. Thousands of alien faces stared back at her with mixtures of curiosity, fear, and fascination. She had rehearsed this speech hundreds of times, but now she decided to throw away her prepared remarks and simply tell the truth. "Honored Council members," she began, "I've spent the last 3 months reading every file about our quarantine. I understand why you feared us. But I think you misunderstood what you were seeing." Admiral Vex leaned forward in his seat. "Explain, human. You saw our soldiers enjoying warfare and concluded that we love violence. You saw us celebrating our enemy's skills and thought we were insane. You watched us turn battles into art and decided we were dangerous." Helen paused and smiled gently. But you missed the most important part. Which is? Asked Counselor Lyra. We never wanted the war to happen in the first place. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Helen waited for quiet before continuing. Every human interviewed by your observers said the same thing, but your translators didn't understand the context. When Colonel Rebecca Stone praised the enemy commander who killed her friend, she wasn't celebrating death. She was honoring a worthy opponent who had given everything to protect his own people, just as she was doing. Helen activated a holographic display showing scenes from Earth's recovery period. After our war ended, we didn't build bigger weapons or train new armies. We built schools, hospitals, and art centers. We created challenges that tested our limits without hurting anyone. We turned the same traits that made us dangerous in war into the foundation of a peaceful civilization. Medical Chief Nora stood up. But your species still shows pleasure responses to dangerous situations. Our brain scans confirm this. Of course we do, Helen replied with a laugh. Danger means we're alive and have a chance to prove what we're capable of. But there's a huge difference between enjoying a challenge and seeking out violence. She gestured to the viewing screens around the chamber, which now showed images from dozens of worlds where young aliens were forming adventure clubs and challenge societies. Look at what's happening across your galaxy. Young beings are discovering rock climbing, puzzle competitions, and extreme sports. Are any of them building weapons or starting wars? The answer was obvious to everyone in the chamber. The new human-influenced activities were competitive and risky, but they weren't violent or destructive. Philosopher General Thek rose slowly from his seat. You claim your species doesn't seek out conflict. But your final war lasted 3 years and involved your entire planet. Helen nodded seriously. That war happened because we had forgotten how to turn our challenges into games instead of destruction. We had lost the ability to compete without killing. Our ancestors made the same mistake many species make. They thought the only way to test themselves was through violence. And now? Asked Council Prime Zareth. Now we know better. We've spent 300 years learning how to satisfy our need for challenge without hurting anyone. We've created competitions that push us to our limits, adventures that test our courage, and problems that require all our creativity to solve. She paused and looked directly at the council leaders. We don't want to teach your people to love war. We want to teach them to love life so much that they refuse to let any situation, even the worst ones, destroy their happiness. The chamber fell completely silent. Helen could hear her own heartbeat as she prepared to make her final argument. You've kept us locked away because you're afraid we'll make the galaxy more dangerous. But look at the evidence. The young beings who've learned from our culture aren't becoming more violent. They're becoming more alive. They're discovering that existence doesn't have to be something you just endure, it can be something you celebrate. Admiral Vex spoke quietly. And if we release you? What will humanity do with its freedom? Helen smiled wider than she had all day. The same thing we've always done. We'll turn whatever challenges we face into opportunities to be amazed by what we're capable of. We'll compete with problems instead of surrendering to them. We'll find reasons to be excited about tomorrow, no matter what tomorrow brings. She gestured to the screens showing adventure clubs and challenge societies across the galaxy. Those young beings didn't become human. They became more themselves. They discovered parts of their nature that had always existed but had never been awakened. Counselor Lyra asked the question everyone was thinking. What if you're wrong? What if human influence makes the galaxy more chaotic? Helen considered this seriously before answering. Then we'll face that chaos the same way we face everything else, by turning it into the most interesting puzzle we've ever had to solve. The vote took 4 hours and was closer than anyone expected. 347 worlds in favor of ending the quarantine, 253 against. As Captain Helen Andrews prepared to leave the chamber, she was approached by dozens of young alien representatives, all asking the same question. When can you teach us more about this thing you call adventure? 3 weeks later, the first human ships left Earth's solar system in 3 centuries. Their crews were singing traditional sailing songs as they headed toward the stars, ready to turn the unknown galaxy into humanity's greatest game yet. The universe would indeed never be the same.